Have you ever wondered how you can build a perfect, full-size digital copy of the most famous shipwreck on Earth, map every rivet, every plate, every scattered shoe across 3 miles of ocean floor, and still not be able to answer the one question everyone actually wants answered? I don't mean how the Titanic sank. If you're watching this, you already know that part. On the night of April the 15th, 1912, the ship struck an iceberg on its maiden voyage and went down in the North Atlantic with more than 1,500 people still aboard. What I want to talk about is what happened in the summer of 2022, when a team of engineers spent 3 weeks hovering nearly 2.5 miles above the wreck and came back with something nobody had ever built before: a complete, full-size digital copy of the ship, exactly as it sits on the seafloor today. And here's the thing, even with that level of detail, there is still one part of the Titanic that has never been found, not once, in over 100 years of looking. Let's start with the scan itself, because the problem it solved was bigger than most people realise. The Titanic rests at about 12,500 feet, roughly 400 nautical miles south of Newfoundland. Since Robert Ballard first found the wreck in 1985, dozens of expeditions have visited it. James Cameron alone has made 33 dives down there. But every single one of those visits only ever captured a piece of the ship. A submersible's floodlights only reach so far in total darkness. You get a hallway, a porthole, a boiler, one section at a time, like exploring a mansion with a flashlight during a power cut. Nobody had ever seen the whole thing, bow to stern to debris field, all at once. The company behind the fix was a deep-sea mapping firm called Magellan, working with the documentary team Atlantic Productions. In the summer of 2022, they sent 2 remotely operated vehicles, nicknamed Romeo and Juliet, down to the wreck site. For 3 weeks, those ROVs worked around the clock, moving in careful, overlapping passes across the hull, the debris field, and everything in between. By the time they surfaced, the team had collected more than 715,000 photographs, along with 4K video and millions of individual laser measurements, roughly 16 terabytes of data, about 10 times larger than any underwater 3D model ever attempted before. Then came the harder part, turning 3 weeks of scans into something usable. Engineers spent months stitching those hundreds of thousands of images into a single, continuous point cloud, precise enough that researchers can zoom in and read the serial number stamped on one of the propellers. Park Stevenson, a Titanic analyst who has spent 20 years studying the wreck, said it was like seeing the ship for the first time, with total clarity rather than fragments. Now here's where it gets interesting, because this digital twin let researchers actually test theories about the sinking that had been debated for over 100 years. Survivors always described the lights staying on almost until the very end, even as the bow disappeared underwater. Nobody could confirm that from the wreck itself until the scan revealed a steam valve sitting on the deck of the stern section, caught in the open position. That single detail confirmed steam was still flowing into the ship's electrical system in its final moments, meaning a team of engineers, led by Chief Engineer Joseph Bell, stayed at their posts in the boiler rooms for more than 2 hours after the collision, shoveling coal, keeping the generators running, keeping the wireless distress signal broadcasting. Every one of those men died. None of them survived. That open valve, sitting quietly on the ocean floor for over a century, may be the closest thing we'll ever have to physical proof of exactly how many lives their decision to stay behind actually saved. The scan also reopened one of the Titanic's oldest controversies. First Officer William Murdoch has spent decades under a cloud, accused by some of abandoning his post in the ship's final minutes. But the model shows the position of a lifeboat, David, on the starboard side, angled in a way that suggests Murdoch's crew was actively preparing to launch a boat when the sea overtook them, a detail that lines up with testimony given at the time by Second Officer Charles Lightoller, who said Murdoch was simply swept away while still trying to do his job. It doesn't prove anything beyond doubt, but it's the first physical evidence in over 100 years pointing toward exonerating him rather than condemning him. Then there's the sinking itself. Titanic was designed to stay afloat, even if 4 of its watertight compartments completely flooded. Engineers always assumed the iceberg tore one long gash into the hull. Using the new scan combined with the ship's original blueprints, naval architects built a computer simulation of the actual collision. And what they found was stranger than the old theory. The contact with the iceberg lasted just 6.3 seconds. It didn't rip one continuous wound into the hull. It punched a narrow line of small, separate punctures, some no larger than a sheet of paper, spread across 6 compartments instead of 4. As naval architect Simon Benson put it, the margin between Titanic sinking and Titanic surviving came down to holes the size of paper, spaced just far enough apart to overwhelm a ship built to survive almost exactly that kind of damage, but not quite that much of it. The debris field told its own story too. Spread across roughly 15 square miles of seafloor, the scan picked out pocket watches, purses, unopened bottles of champagne, gold coins, hair combs, and single shoes lying exactly where they came to rest. Historian Yasmin Khan worked to connect some of those objects back to the passengers who once owned them, turning scattered wreckage into individual human stories again more than a century later. And buried in among all of that, the scan even picked up something that had nothing to do with 1912 at all. A fossilized megalodon tooth, a reminder that the ocean floor was writing its own history long before Titanic ever arrived to disturb it. None of this comes without a deadline attached. The wreck is deteriorating faster than most people realise. Captain Edward Smith's bathtub, once a recognisable fixture inside the officers' quarters, is already gone, dissolved by iron-eating bacteria called Halomonas titanici, slowly consuming the ship's steel and turning it into hanging rusticles. Researchers studying the digital twin are open about the fact that they are racing against time. Eventually, the physical Titanic will be gone, and what Magellan's team built in 2022 will likely be the most complete record of the ship that will ever exist. So the scan gave us the engineers who stayed behind, the officer who may not have deserved the blame he's carried for a century, and the precise physics of exactly how a ship built to survive 4 flooded compartments ended up losing to 6. But for every question that Scan answered, there's one it never came close to touching. More than 1,500 people died the night the Titanic sank. In all the decades since, across every dive, including Cameron's 33 trips down there, not one human body has ever been found. Not a skeleton, not a single bone. And that on the surface doesn't make sense. Divers have found belongings scattered everywhere across the site. Pocket watches, hair combs, coats and shoes, hundreds of them, sitting in pairs on the ocean floor, exactly the width apart a person's feet would be. Cameron himself has said as much directly, that he's seen pairs of shoes strongly suggesting a body had been there once, but never any actual remains. And here's what makes it stranger still. Shipwrecks far older than the Titanic have produced intact human remains. The Mary Rose, an English warship that sank in 1545, gave up dozens of skeletons when it was raised centuries later. The Vasa, a Swedish warship that sank in 1628, did the same. Those ships are centuries older than the Titanic. So why would a ship that sank in 1912 leave behind nothing but shoes? It comes down to 2 things: where the Titanic is sitting, and what happens to a body once the flesh is gone. Robert Ballard has explained this more than once, and it comes down to something called the calcium carbonate compensation depth. Below roughly 3,000 feet, ocean water becomes undersaturated in calcium carbonate, the mineral bones are made of. Once deep-sea scavengers eat away the flesh and expose the bone underneath, the water itself starts dissolving what remains. The Titanic sits 4 times deeper than that threshold, and Ballard has pointed out the same thing happens to the Bismarck. It's not that something took the remains away, the ocean itself erased them, slowly, over decades. And the scavengers work fast. Deep-sea fish, crabs, and bacteria are remarkably efficient at consuming organic material, even in near-freezing water. The cold slows decomposition, but it doesn't stop it. And over more than 100 years, there was more than enough time for the process to finish completely. So why are the shoes still there? Tanned leather goes through a chemical process that makes it far more resistant to decomposition than skin, muscle, or bone. It doesn't feed the same scavengers the same way organic tissue does. So while a body decomposed and its bones eventually dissolved, the shoes on its feet simply sat there, chemically stubborn, refusing to break down at anywhere near the same rate. That's why divers keep finding pairs of boots scattered across the debris field, sitting exactly where a person once stood, long after every trace of that person is gone. There's one more piece often missed. Not everyone who died that night actually sank down to the wreck site. Survivor accounts describe a storm system moving through in the days afterward, and many victims wore life jackets, keeping their bodies on the surface rather than sinking with the ship. Recovery ships like the Mackay Bennett were sent out and picked up hundreds of bodies, floating across a search area roughly 50 miles wide, some buried at sea, others brought back to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where you can visit their graves today. Many more were never recovered at all, scattered by the storm and the currents before any ship reached them. A significant number of those who died that night were never inside the wreck to begin with. That still leaves the people who went down with the ship, trapped inside as it sank. And there's one theory that has never been confirmed. Ballard has speculated that sealed-off sections, like the engine room, deep inside the ship and shielded from the currents that carry scavengers, might behave differently, decomposition slowing dramatically, without that flow of oxygen-rich water. He said he wouldn't be surprised if remains were preserved somewhere in there, but nobody has gone in to check. Those spaces are dangerous to access, and the Titanic has been formally recognised, under international agreement, as a maritime memorial, treated as a grave. That status is precisely why no robot or diver has ever pushed into that engine room to find out for certain. If Ballard is right, whatever is down there is going to stay down there, so that's the fuller picture. A scan detailed enough to read a propeller's serial number and rebuild the ship's final 6 minutes down to the second, sitting right alongside a mystery it was never built to solve. A depth so extreme, the ocean itself dissolves bone once it's exposed. Scavengers efficient enough to finish that job within decades. A storm on the surface that meant hundreds of victims never reached the wreck at all. And somewhere inside a sealed engine room nobody has ever entered. A question that all 715,000 photographs still couldn't answer. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, let me know in the comments, and I'll keep making more of these. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you next time.